meantime, we know that you've been also discussing the situation, which is very serious, in Syria. I mean, the American media thinks that we're caring more about, Lindsay Lohan's taxes at this point than the fact that it seems that Assad is moving sarin gas into deliverable missiles, and we're saying where the world is watching, which we seem to be observers of everything these days. You've noted that he should get immunity in an effort to stop him from using chemical weapons. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I'm no fan of Assad. Let me be clear. I see no virtue in his regime. On the other hand, I also see that the opposition is filled with terrorist elements, and while the use of chemical weapons against the opposition, and particularly against innocent civilians, would be a tragedy, there's also a tragedy at risk if these chemical weapons get out of Syria and get into the hands of terrorists worldwide. So I think we've got to try and bring this horrible slaughter to a conclusion. Right now, the reason I think the Assad regime is readying the chemical weapons is that they think they're on the brink of defeat, and they very much worry that there'll be a bloodbath against the Alawites, Christians, the Druze, other supporters of the regime. So I favor getting Assad out of the country and giving him immunity from prosecution, not because I think he deserves it, he doesn't, but because I think on a very straightforward analysis, it's better to prevent the slaughter of more innocent civilians, and I think getting him out of the country would do that.
All right, so if he goes out... I mean, if he goes out, then isn't there a vacuum? And then don't we still have the worry of the Al Qaeda and the other jihadists who are with the rebels, or who on the other side that we could trust is strong enough? Because obviously we don't see any diplomacy or major work that we're doing to facilitate some kind of non-insane regime. What is the option if Assad is not there?
Well, I don't think there is a good option. I think the administration has failed for 2 straight years to identify leaders in the opposition that we could trust with our assistance. I think the possibility of a bloodbath inside Syria is very real, and I think the risk of terrorist elements, Al-Qaeda sympathizers, taking control after Assad departs one way or the other is also very high. So you have to ask, with 2 years of conflict, why haven't we found leaders, if there are such, that we could trust? But my basic concern, I think our ability to influence what's going on in Syria now is very limited. My basic concern is these chemical weapons.
Right.
Because they are obviously a threat to everybody in Syria, but they're a threat to us, to Israel, to our friends in the region and around the world. If they come out of their stockpiles, if they get into
I'm glad you said that, because they've been slaughtering their own people for 2 years, and I've heard from some of my listeners and readers saying, who cares if they slaughter their people with gas or with conventional weapons? But your concern is that that weapons then would move past that environment, even though we'd want it to be stopped, whether it was chemicals or conventional weapons. That your concern is the fact that this would proliferate within the region itself and then past the region.
Yeah, absolutely. If these weapons get into the hands of terrorists who have not hesitated to attack civilians around the world, if they get this capability, imagine September the 11th, the first September the 11th, in New York and Washington, if they had chemical weapons. So this is a very, very serious problem. And I must say it is unfortunately typical of the Obama administration's lack of concern for the issue of proliferation of chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. We haven't touched on Iran, but that's obviously very much in this mix too. They've got a lot at stake in trying to keep the Assad regime in power in Syria, and they've been shipping them arms right along with little or no objection, at least no effective objection by the Obama administration.
Yeah, Ambassador Bolton, we're looking at, obviously a lot of us are unhappy with the election, and we're concerned for the country, and we see what failing from behind delivers to this nation and to a free world and to lives across the world. You're one of the shining voices. You mentioned before you toyed with the idea of running for president. There are 20 Democrat seats open up in the Senate in 2014. Clearly, America's going to be making new decisions in a couple of years. How do you see your role in this nation? There are very few people that a majority of Americans respect and trust on these issues. Do you see yourself in elective office in the future, and is the Senate something that you would see? How do you see yourself in play in this country coming up in the next few years?
Well, I certainly intend to stay very much involved in trying to make the case for a strong and secure America. I live in Maryland. That's a tough place for a Republican to run for anything. But I'm trying to decide what to do now in the wake of the election. I tell you, one thing I'm concerned about is the general proposition, and I think the president's partially to blame, but I think Republican leaders are to blame as well, is we just don't have an adequate discussion about threats to American security. We haven't for the last 4 years, and I'm afraid it's only going to get worse. What we've discussed today is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm worried the entire Middle East will spiral out of control here. We've got threats from China in Asia. We've got Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. Just because the president doesn't want to talk about threats to American national security and our friends and allies doesn't mean they're going away. Quite the contrary. It means they're getting more serious. And I think the next 4 years are going to see the pace and scope of challenges increase. So this is something that I'm very concerned about, and one major reason I don't plan to go anywhere.
Well,